Now, something that's really important to look at before you even think about what fish you're going to get is the water you have, because you're going to hear time and time again of fish keeping. You're not keeping fish, you're keeping water, and that's really, really true. So for me, what I like to do is I like to start with the water that I actually have coming out of my taps. So my water is relatively neutral. It's not too hard, it's not too soft, and it's also got a pretty normal pH. Now, let's start off with hard and soft water, because that's really important, because that's going to dictate the type of fish that you can keep. Now, what is hard and soft water? Well, hard water, let's start with soft water. Soft water is super easy. So rain. When rain is falling from the sky, all it is pure water. There's nothing in it when it starts falling. It is just water. It's just H2O that has evaporated up and it's coming back down from the clouds. And we know our water cycle, and what we're getting is just plain water, and it's soft. There's nothing in it. It's only got water. Now, as rain falls and it lands on rocks, it passes through those rocks, and as it does, little bits of stuff gets into that and adds to the composition of the water. And those things like calcium carbonates, well, they add extra minerals into the water, and that water becomes harder. And the more of these dissolved salts that come in from the rocks, the harder the water gets. So really hard water will end up being able to cover all of the inside of your kettles and your pipes with lime scale. And lime scale is a result of as the temporary hardness in your water is actually boiled off. So if you boil water that has calcium carbonates in it, you'll actually get lime scale left. That'll be residue as the water just goes back out of it and it turns back into H2O again as steam. So it will leave behind all of the dissolved material. Now, if you have really, really hard water, you'll find your kettle always has a white scum in it. It can be hard, it can be chalky, it's really nasty. Sometimes it's on the rim of your sink. That's because when you're using soap, hard water reacts with that, and it creates a scum rather than a really nice kind of soapy, bubbly bath maybe that you see in the films and stuff. That looks really cool. And that's actually a really handy kind of simple way of testing to see if your water is hard or soft. If you just get some plain regular soap and you kind of get it in the water and you try kind of smush it up, if it's soft water, there'll be nothing for the soap to react with, and it'll just turn into bubbles and it'll be really nice. But if you have harder water, it's actually going to be kind of scummy. The water will go kind of milky. You'll get residue along the rim and you'll get no bubbles. That's one of the kind of key things that you'll see, is that there'll be no bubbles form because it won't be able to. So there are ways that you can test it really simply. And of course, you can always use a test kit to test the water hardness. Now, there's two different types of hardness. We won't get too much into that. That's a little bit more than the basic stuff. But if your water's hard, it will limit you to fish that actually like hard water. So if you think about it, if you get fish from a lake, and that lake is surrounded by lots and lots of like rocks that the water flows through, and on the way it picks up all of this hardness. Well, by the time it gets to the lake, it's going to be much harder than water that's perhaps just flowing down straight down a mountain into a stream, and that stream is just kind of mud and clay and stuff like that, and it's not really got those harder minerals to dissolve into it. So you can have water that's quite soft and you can have water that's quite hard, and you have fish that have grown and evolved in hard water areas, and you've got fish that have grown and evolved in soft water areas. Now, the way they get their minerals from the environment, how they survive in the water, well, that's dependent on the way they've evolved. So if you take a fish that's evolved in a really hard water situation and you put it into water that's quite soft, or vice versa, they won't do very well in it. In fact, some fish, all fish will have a range that they can operate in, but some fish won't be able to tolerate very small differences between what it was they evolved in and, you know, what we might be able to offer them. So if you have rams, for example, well, they'll want their water nice and soft, or maybe discus. They'll want their water nice and soft, particularly wild discus. And oftentimes wild caught fish will really, really need to have the type of water that they evolved in. Now, we've line bred a little bit of that out. That's where basically like we take fish that we're doing better in harder water than than some of the other ones, and we've bred them. So every kind of generation gets a little bit hardier. But generally speaking, if you get fish that evolved in a soft water environment, you don't want to put them into hard water. Now, there are ways that we can change our water hardness, but I would always suggest work with the water you have and keep fish for that water, and your life will be so much easier. Now, here in Ireland, my water comes straight out of the tap. Our water system, it's not great. A lot of our pipe work is quite old, and we add things into it like chlorine and chloramines, and you know, they're not nice and they're really bad for our fish, but they don't really affect the water softness or hardness too much. And where I am, the water, I would say that it's neither really hard or really soft. It's kind of sitting somewhere in the middle. Now that gives me a little bit of latitude in the fish that I can keep, because as long as my fish are, you know, happy in the conditions I can give them and they're healthy in it, it's fine. So I can keep fish from just outside, fish that like kind of slightly harder water and slightly softer water, but I couldn't keep fish that like really soft water without treating it. So say for example, I've got a discus, but he's like a line bred discus that I've had, you know, that has been bred from discus numerous times in aquariums and has been bred in the hobby and in the trade. Whereas if I was to get wild caught discus, they would not last long in my water at all. Now, similarly, my water wouldn't be quite hard enough for, say, some of the African cichlids. They're fish that evolve in quite hard water lakes. They wouldn't do as well in my water. I'd have to make the water a little bit harder. Now, there are ways of doing this, but for the purposes of getting into fish keeping, you should always get your water tested to see if you've got hard water or soft water, and then decide what fish you're going to keep. And look, we're going to go into the fish that you can keep in soft water and the fish that can do well in hard water in a later video. But it's really important that you get your water tested to see what type of water you have before you choose your fish, because you're going to walk into the pet store and you're going to love these fish. You're going to think that they're absolutely awesome, and they're going to be like way off the spectrum in the wrong end for you, and it's going to break your heart. So the way I always recommend it is get your water tested, because that dictates everything then. Because if you have fish that want hard water, but you've got soft water, or you have hard water and you have fish that want soft water, they won't last. They won't live. They won't thrive. They'll never get their best colors. Fish get amazing colors when they're happy. When they're happy, they're not worried about anything and they just get really awesome colors. And that's something that, of course, we want to see in our fish. We want to see them looking happy. We want to see them looking their best. So it's really important that you make sure that you match the fish to the water. The other thing is, your fish won't do things like try breed in the wrong water, because it's really important for them to have the right breeding conditions, and that would be their natural environment and what they need. And the other thing as well is, if you have an illness or something like that, it's going to be harder for them to bounce back, because they just won't have that level of vitality, that energy, just that enthusiasm that they would have if they were in the right environment with the right water. So it all starts with your water. So the first thing you're going to do before you even go out and choose your tank or choose your fish is just see what type of water you have. Now, most local fish stores are going to be awesome for checking your water. They'll tell you what the hardness is in your water, and they'll be able to advise you some more about that, and what type of fish maybe they have that are in that water, and what the type of water they have in the store. Feel free to ask them what's the level of hardness in the water in the store. You know, if they can't tell you that, you should probably go to a different store, because they should definitely know what the hardness levels in their water are. That's really important. Now, once you've got all your hardness and your softness checked and figured out what type of water you have, then you're going to go into your pH, and your pH is something slightly different. That's the level of acidity or alkalinity in the water that you have. So, what is pH? Now, pH is the acidity or alkalinity of our water measured on a logarithmic scale. That last part is actually really important. So let's break that down a bit. So 7 is neutral, and as you drop from 7 to 1, you go lower. The lower that number is, the more acidic it is. And when you go 7 to 8 to 9 up to 14, the higher that number goes towards 14, the more alkaline it is. Now, I'm not going to get really in depth into pH and acidity and alkalinity. There's lots of good videos on that. For this, I want to do a basic overview of how it affects our fish and what we need to know about it before we go and we get our fish. So, some fish like more acidic water and some fish like more alkaline water. What's really important to note is that it's a logarithmic scale. So 7 to 6 isn't a step of 1. 6 is actually 10 times more acidic than 7. 5 is 10 times more acidic than 6, which means 5 is actually 100 times more acidic than 7. And 8 is 10 times more alkaline than 7. 9 is 10 times more alkaline than 8, so 9 is 100 times more alkaline than 7. When you look at that going to, like, from one extreme to the other, so when you go from 5 to 9, you've gone 5 to 6, that's 10 times, to 7 is 100 times, to 8 is 1,000 times, to 9 is 10,000 times more alkaline if you go to 9. So if you can imagine bringing a fish through that change, like, that's crazy. Like, we don't think that they're big numbers because it's really hard for our brain to operate on a log scale, but trust me, those numbers are horrendous. And if you change the pH for a fish by much, it can kill them. Now, a lot of people find when they bring their fish home from the local fish store and they put them in the tank, they can be dead within a day or two. And sometimes they're like, oh, they sold me a sick fish. That's not always the case. You need to measure the pH of your water coming out of your tap. Now, you can't change the pH in your water. Let's get that out there. pH can be changed. Don't do it. Trust me, you do not want to get into changing your pH. The water coming out of my taps, 7.2. A little bit alkaline, close to neutral. A lot of fish do well around neutral. Even fish that evolved in water parameters beyond that have been bred and they've slowly been brought to the point where they're at neutral. So you can have a wild-caught discus at a pH of 5. If I was to put him into that tank with that discus, he'd die because that tank is over 100 times more alkaline than what that fish was just in. Now, over 60 years, they've line bred those wild discus and increased the pH bit by bit by bit. So now I've got a fish that does really, really well. That discus is doing super at 7.2. I could get him to breed by just dropping that down to probably 6.9. And you can change the water chemistry by introducing things. And look, we'll get into it really briefly, but you shouldn't be introducing changes to your pH because, like I said, changes in pH, particularly big sudden changes, are so detrimental to your fish's health. They will kill your fish. Why is the water acidic or why is the water alkaline? Well, this is important because generally fish from certain areas will have preferences towards one or the other. So if you look at South American fish, like lots of the South American cichlids and lots of the South American tetras and the suckermouth catfish and all these really cool fish, a lot of them come from rivers that are either tributaries of the Amazon or the Amazon itself, or they're coming from an area where you have the world's biggest rainforest, the lungs of the earth. You've got billions upon billions upon billions of trees with branches with leaves that drop off and they drop into the water where they start to break down. Now, dissolved organic compounds turn into acid. What's a dissolved organic compound? It's basically anything that was alive that's breaking down. That includes trees, the wood off trees, branches, leaves. Think about how many billions of leaves drop off into the rivers and tributaries of the Amazon over the course of a year. It blows my mind. It's just too much. Like the Amazon, the water levels rise. Lots of those plants that were terrestrial, they'll die back a bit. Now the water level drops, they'll grow on again. In the meantime, you've got all this dissolved organic plant material that's decomposing. It's going acidic. If you take a river and you have that starting off at its source in a stream up in a hill where there's some, maybe some grass and a couple of trees, but there's not that much leaves falling into it. The rain coming down and landing straight in it, it might have a pretty neutral pH. Now, as that flows further and more leaves are breaking up in that water, you've got more dissolved organic compounds. You've got more branches in it. You've got more of these things that are breaking down and making the water more acidic. Now, as that continues, that pH can drop quite significantly. So you can have water further down a stream that has a pH of 5 where it started off at the top of the stream with a pH of 7. Why is it that all rivers aren't like this, and why all rivers don't pour into the sea in a big acidic soup? Well, it's because they get diluted. they get diluted by other rivers that don't have as much dissolved organic compounds. So it's never that big an issue. But in certain areas, particularly in South America, some areas in Asia, you'll get pHs in the water which are really low, which are quite acidic, and the fish evolved there. So some fish, if you want them and your pH is neutral or above, you just can't have them. Because even though you could probably slowly bring them up, some of them aren't there yet. So you can't put those fish in your water. Now, the closer it is to what those fish evolved in, the better those fish will do. Similarly, you have alkaline water. Why is the water alkaline? Well, particularly in Africa, in the Rift Lakes, you've got huge lakes in this really hot environment where there's lots of evaporation going on. And it doesn't have the same amount of trees maybe around it, and you don't have much by way of organic compounds to make the water acidic. But what you do have is lots of volcanic minerals. Now, as the water's coming down, it might start off as a weak carbonic acid, which is what happened when the rain was falling down, got a little bit of carbon dioxide dissolved into it from the air, and it starts to break down the rock. And as it breaks down the rock, it starts to fill up with all these dissolved ions and salts and compounds and all that stuff. When the water ends up going down and ends up in these lakes, it drops that stuff off, and then the water evaporates. And the more water evaporates, the more dissolved salt you have, and it's less diluted. So the water becomes more alkaline. And it's because of all those non-organic materials that have got dissolved into it. So there are rocks and minerals and those kind of compounds. So it's different kind of compounds that make stuff more alkaline than more acidic in the water that our fish are born and bred in. So some of the African lakes are so alkaline, and alkaline again, the higher it goes, the more dangerous it is. Just the way the lower the acidic scale goes, the more dangerous it is. Some of those lakes, their pHs of 8. Some of those lakes go as far as 12. So think about that. 7 to 8, that's 10 times more alkaline. 8 to 9, that's 100. 9 to 10, that's 1,000. 10,000. You're going into hundreds of thousands times more alkaline than the water that's in my tank, which is still considered to be alkaline. So you can have these massive variances in scale. What you're going to do every time is you're going to get your water, you're going to bring it to your fish store, bring it quite quickly, because your water chemistry can change in the container over time. Get a nice big container of it, bring it into your local fish store, and what you're going to do is you're going to ask them to test your water, you're going to ask them to test the pH, and you're going to ask them to test the hardness. Now, you want to know those two figures, because if your water is really, really, really hard, there's certain fish that won't do as well, and certainly won't breed in those conditions. But if your water is really, really, really soft, or your water is really, really acidic, that might limit your options as well. You need to know that. But the other thing you need to know is, what is the pH of the water from the aquarium in the store that you're buying your fish from? Because you know what? It doesn't matter if that fish came from an environment where the pH was 6.5 and your water out of your tap is 6.5. If you're getting it from a store where the water's 7.9, you bring it back home, your fish might die when you put it in your tank. So you need to be aware of that, and you may need to set up a tank in the meantime that you can slowly bring that down, or better yet, don't get that fish. Get a fish that came from similar water to yours, if at all possible, because you know what? If you get fish from drastically different waters, they'll never do as well. Trust me, I'm doing this 20 years. I've tried to keep all sorts of fish, especially early in my fish keeping hobby. Like I was not clued in. I was getting different information from different local fish stores. They basically tell me anything they needed to sell me fish half the time. Because sucker, I'd buy into it because I had no other information. And I don't want you suffering like that. I don't want fish dying unnecessarily or fish sick, you wasting your money, or being given bad information. So don't get fish from aquariums or from other local fish stores or anything like that that have drastically different water from yours. That's my recommendation, because they won't do as well. We still have a couple of things to talk about before we even start looking at those fish. Because you know what? We get our water down. We know what water we're keeping. Brilliant. We need to keep that water clean and clear all the time. That's the next step. That's the next video we're going to do, is maintenance and tank size. What can you fit in the space that you are able to set up for your aquarium? And how often can you maintain it? Here, I'm going to wrap this one up. We're going to go into maintenance and tank size in the next video. We're going to go into that in depth, so you guys can know a little bit more about what's involved in the maintenance of an aquarium and what you need to do. And then look, we're well on our way then to choosing fish. So I really appreciate you sticking this through to the end. If you're still here, really appreciate it. Thanks for watching. There's going to be some awesome stuff coming up on this. And you know what? I made so many mistakes when I started fish keeping because it was 20 years ago. Oh, yeah, goodness. Oh my God, so old. 20 years ago. I didn't have all the options and resources that are out there now. I was literally driving from local fish store to local fish store to local fish store. And I was getting information off as many people as I could before I was going and buying a fish because everybody was telling me something different. And, you know, I couldn't blame them. A lot of them maybe were just salespeople or whatever, like, you know, maybe working on commission. And, you know, look, they're doing what they need to do for their survival. But we have more options here. And I want to share my knowledge and experience with you guys because, you know what, it can be hard to try to get that basic information for when you're starting, or if you have a tank that you're having tons of problems with, you've got loads of algae, your fish are dying. You know what? You could be bringing back fish and they're dying all the time because your pH is actually really drastically different from your local fish store, or your hardness. Your water's super hard, their water's super soft, or vice versa. So you need to know what water you have coming out of your taps before you even think about putting the fish in it. But look, we're going to wrap it up there. I'll talk to you in the next video. That's going to be maintenance. And thanks, guys. Talk to you later, guys. Bye!